70% of teachers required to administer standardized testing state that these tests are not developmentally appropriate for their students. This proves that standardized testing is not the best way to measure children's abilities. Through all my research, I was left with this question: why does standardized testing cause students to conform to a standard that is unrealistic to most? When students are told through test scores that they are below or just average, it can take away the drive to do better in school, when in reality, students are being scored based on how well other students did. If the children taking these tests are becoming discouraged because of scores, there is no reason for them to strive to do better, and the love of learning is likely tarnished. Today, I'm arguing that government-mandated standardized testing is causing students and teachers to be put into a metaphorical box that not everyone can fit into. Many factors go into standardized test scores that cannot be physically seen. The constant competition for the best scores and the lack of variety in testing causes psychological harm to the students taking the exams. To begin, Michelle Gelfand, professor of organizational behavior at Stanford University, describes the impact that synchronization and conformity can have on participants. She writes that it can decrease creativity while promoting disruptive behavior. This can be proven through the use of standardized tests because the curriculum is relatively similar every year and students have no variety in the subjects they are learning. With a large focus on academic subjects rather than creative ones, a student's use of imagination is put on the back burner. In a study performed by Gelfand and her colleagues, it was discovered that a group of people who performed the same tasks in synchrony for an extended period wrote less creative stories than a group of people who were not partaking in the mind-conforming tasks. On the graph, you can see that there was a significant decrease in creativity and in the word count. This study correlates with standardized testing by representing on a smaller scale what is happening to students in the American education system. Furthermore, Gabriella Hirsch, neuroimaging researcher at the Harvard Medical School, illustrates that 3 dominant kinds of test anxiety could harm a student's grade. The first is the distraction account, where the stress of the test is taking focus away from the test itself. The second is the over-monitoring account, where students are so hyper-focused on doing it correctly that they overanalyze and mess something up. And the final form of anxiety is the over-arousal account, where students are so concerned about the social pressures to do well that they crumble under the stress. Gelfand and Hirsch's studies further prove that standardized tests cannot accurately measure a student's abilities if other components are not taken into account. Test scores do not accurately represent a student's knowledge because all students are not given the same opportunities but are still expected to conform to the same test. Richard Lomax, professor of education at Ohio State University, conveys that students whose first language is not English are put at a disadvantage from the beginning of the school year. In this article, it was reported that many teachers tend to teach the reading and mathematics curriculum with a heavy focus on topics that are content-specific to the mandated tests. Teachers who decide to teach the mandated testing materials are not at fault, they are simply teaching the material given to them. The issue comes from the one-size-fits-all approach that the government has taken with standardized testing. Augustino Lorito, assistant professor of public administration at the University of Illinois, studies how neighborhood crime has an impact on test scores. Through data from the New York City Education Department and the New York City Police Department, Lorito and her team concluded that an increase in violence in a residential neighborhood will negatively impact a student's scores. Unfortunately, it is very difficult for the people taking these tests, for the people living in these areas to leave them due to poor economic conditions. To accurately examine a child's academic ability through standardized testing, a level playing field is something that needs to be given so that all students are given the same chances. The heavy focus on teachers' jobs and students' futures is being decided by unfair testing that is harming the education system more than helping it. Kyung-hee Kim, researcher and professor at the William & Mary School of Education, discusses the role that schools play in a child's reduction of creativity as they grow older. Around 300,000 students in grades kindergarten through 12th grade were tested. The results showed that while IQ was increasing after 6th grade, creativity was decreasing significantly. Kim's research and Michelle Gelfand's study about synchrony decreasing creativity back up the claim that there is such a large focus on securing good test scores that nurturing a child's creativity is deemed unimportant to most schools. Most schools correlate how well a class does on standardized tests and how well the teacher is teaching. This fails to take into account that many teachers are placed with children who do not speak English as their first language, have a learning disability, or simply do not strive for good grades. Author Mary Williams interviewed one teacher from Pennsylvania who talks about her experience with this idea, discussing how half her salary is tied to how well her students perform on standardized tests. One teacher is quoted in the same article saying she used to teach 12 different books in her English class, and now, with a provided curriculum designed to produce better scores on government-issued tests, she only teaches 2 books. This statistic can be viewed on the graph in order to truly see the deficit between the two numbers. This provides the insight into the impact of standardized testing on high school education. Standardized testing is taking away from students' education, making them less creative and less likely to be able to grow in the subjects they are learning. Standardized testing is not limited to the formats that are used in schools every year. They can measure creativity and imagination skills and give an overview of how each child is learning. Sierra Gonzalez, a researcher at the University of California, conducted a study to determine the effectiveness of computer-based testing, CBT, versus paper and pencil testing, PPT. Through the testing of disabled and non-English speaking students, it was found that CBT was more accurate than PPT. This may be because with CBT, it is more feasible for the test to be translated into another language or altered so that each participant is given equal opportunities to prove what they know. This also verifies that standardized testing is not limited to the paper and pencil method that most are familiar with. That is only a small portion of what standardized testing can be. Though there are forms of standardized testing that produce more accurate individualized results, it cannot be ignored that the vast majority of schools are not using these ideas. The idea of standardized testing has been around for over 100 years, so this is not something that can go away overnight. A gradual decrease in standardized testing is one solution to this issue. Alfie Kohn, author and lecturer, describes in his book the need for standardized testing to be abolished. Kohn describes that while many schools are claiming that they will prepare students for the real world, standardized testing is only taking time away from those lessons and has no impact on what a child will achieve in life after school. With this idea implemented in schools, the future of curriculum and testing would look completely different. There would no longer be the looming presence of testing at the end of the year, and teachers could take time to explore subjects they would not always have the opportunity to teach. There are limitations to the solution, however. Schools would have to find another way to make sure that teachers are doing the best they can to educate students throughout the school year. There would also be no way for students to gain an understanding of where they stand or what could be improved on. The final solution that solves the implications of abolishing standardized testing is incorporating progress testing at the beginning and end of each child's school year. With this solution, a student would be expected to take a baseline test at the beginning of the year to assess skills that they have a minor understanding of or have never learned before. At the end of the year, the child will then retake the test to see what they have learned. It is expected that they will do better on the end of the year test than the one they took at the beginning of the year. The state of Florida has already implemented this idea, doing away with standardized testing and moving toward a form of tests that are on an individual level. In the future, this idea will allow teachers more freedom in their curriculum to learn various subjects. This has the same positive implications while getting rid of the negative ideas in the previous solution offered. The American education system would finally be able to break out of the mold that it was placed in under government-mandated standardized testing.
Okay. Thanks, Claire. The first question I'd like to ask you. What evidence did you gather that you didn't use in either the paper or the presentation, and why did you choose not to use it?
I found an article by Sarah Wood from the Department of Psychology at the Florida State University, and she conducted a study that determined how different forms of test anxiety impact individual students' test scores. And I included it in my paper, but I had to take it out of the presentation due to not having enough time, as well as already having enough evidence for this claim. So I decided to take it out, just mainly time reasons.
Okay. Thanks. Second question. What does your conclusion respond to any of the other research or sources you examined?
So my conclusion and my main solution was to implement progress testing, which allows students to see how much they've grown throughout the year, and this was backed by author and editor Elsie Hamayan, who discusses the need for more individualized tests, and this synthesized all the solutions that I read throughout my research into one that took all of the cons and kind of solved them of all the solutions.
Okay. All right. Thank you.